I think it's past time we have a tough conversation about Matt McMahon and LSU basketball. We're talking about that and so much more today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you as always for listening in. If you haven't already, make sure you tell a friend to listen in to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure if you haven't, subscribe to us. That way you don't miss a single thing. We're dropping them every single weekday, Monday through Friday. And we got a lot to talk about as we approach the big weekend. I know we're more focused on college football playoff. I'm taping the pod right now while we're in the middle of the Ole Miss Miami game. Got one more matchup going on tonight in the CFP semifinals. Then the focus is going to shift over to obviously the NFL playoffs. Sadly, the Saints aren't involved, so we're going to kind of start to pivot ourselves back into college basketball mode because it's definitely something worth talking about. Because LSU men's basketball, we need to have a tough conversation. And I say that it's coming out of love because I think that this team showed a lot of potential heading into conference play, right? We've talked about it a little bit. You know, they didn't look all that great against Boston College. They had to eke that out in overtime, an emotional win. And they had a big come down moment against Texas Tech. And that wound up being their first loss of the season. Again, Texas Tech 14th ranked. It's justified. But when you look at the last two games, to start off SEC play, which is where you're going to make your hay. And more importantly, the committee is going to determine whether or not you are going to be deserving of a spot at the table when it comes to the field of 68. Because look at what they did heading into conference play. They played Tarleton State, UNO, FIU, Alcorn, Omaha, Drake DePaul. They only had three true games that you could put some merit on, and that is Boston College, Texas Tech, and SMU. And you went 2-1 in those. And you got absolutely outclassed by Texas Tech, 82 to 56, 82 to 58. That was not a great look. And then you start off conference play, you lose a heartbreaker to Texas A&M. Okay, I think we can kind of like live with that. But then you lay an egg at home in the conference opener, 78 to 68 on Tuesday night. And you only had 2-3 people that were in double digits, and two of them barely got over 10 points in the game. Mike Nwoko was cleaning up the boards, but you didn't have anybody else that was making an impact. Max McKinnon, 15 points. And now you're sitting at 12-3, and you lost a South Carolina team. You allowed Elijah Strong to just manhandle your ass. That is not a great look. And now you are going to be going through, it's not as tough as, you know, the SEC basketball slate used to be back when Coach Cal used to be running that Kentucky program right through you. But you do have to deal with a near top 10 Vandy team on Saturday. You could be starting off conference play 0-3. Think about that for just a minute, you know? Just think about that statement that you are going to be starting off the season potentially 0-3 in conference. That is not a good look, especially when you've got the bulk of your schedule left to go. And it makes me wonder, Matt McMahon has been kind of given the extended stay of execution for a lot of reasons. Mainly because of the fact that he was given this job where he was basic, to me at least, from my perspective, it's always been he was given that job to be a bridge guy for a few years until, enough time has gone away to where the stink is off of the Will Wade situation, right? Here's the thing, though. It's 2026 for this team, for him. And this team has just, for the most part, underwhelmed throughout the season. LSU basketball has not given me a whole hell of a lot of faith, right? Simply because this men's basketball program just does not show me any heart, especially when you're playing in the Conference of Dixie. You could say the same thing to a certain extent about Kim Mulkey's team losing to start off the 2026 SEC slate after you ran through everybody that you faced off against. It's not a great look, but I think that Kim Mulkey gets a little bit more of a, more leeway, if you will. You lost a heartbreaker to Vandy. You bounced back and whipped up on Georgia. You've only got a couple losses over the course of the season so far. Trust me, it's going to get a lot more difficult. The level of difficulty is going to go up. But I think that's because the SEC women's basketball is on a different level. You've got South Carolina. You've got Texas. You've got so many teams that are towards the upper echelon. You got Kentucky. You went 0-2. You bounced back tonight, 80-59. But you got Texas on Sunday on the women's basketball side. So you've got two really top flight matchups on deck over the next 72 hours. On Saturday, you've got a big matchup at noon at Vanderbilt, 11th ranked Commodores. And then LSU is going to be hosting second ranked Texas. Trust me, if you are a basketball fan, this is your weekend to just lock in amongst everything else going on in the world of college football playoff action. And also, we got to give a shout out to the NFL because the playoffs are going to be getting started up on Saturday, and I'm looking forward to it all. But I do have to say, going back to the main topic of du jour has to be, Matt McMahon. I'm kind of been thinking about this for a minute, and I feel like it looks to me, and I'm sure we'll see more of it going into mid-January and probably even into early February. I think once we get past the matchup against 18th ranked currently Georgia, I think we'll have a better idea of what this team looks like. And more importantly, we'll have an idea of whether or not this team is a lot like the last year of Johnny Jones, or if they start to rally and turn things around. That said, it is going to be a very tough slate in the month of January. You got Vanderbilt again tomorrow afternoon at noon. You've got the University of Kentucky. The Wildcats are still a interesting team. They're not necessarily as much of a lock to win as they were when Coach Cal was leading that team not too long ago. Mizzou could be a win. Then you have Florida and Arkansas, who has always given you all kinds of trouble, no matter who's the head coach. Then you have Mississippi State and South Carolina to wrap up the month of January. And then you deal with Georgia. If we start to see these matchups like a Missouri or a Mississippi State where you, on paper, are supposed to win and those turn into L's, I think we can start saying that this team has given up on Matt McMahon. I hope that's not the case, but that would just be what I'm going to infer and kind of keep a very close eye on as we progress in conference play. That said, though, I think it's just going to be interesting to see what the vibe is, because I feel like Matt McMahon has been given plenty of rope, and I think if they can't make a deep run in the SEC tournament, more importantly, make the NCAA tournament in March, I feel like Matt McMahon's days as LSU's head coach are numbered. it's going to be a significantly less amount of money you're going to have to pay out for him versus what you had to pay out for Coach O, what you had to pay out for Brian Kelly, and also what you had to pay out for Will Wade when he got the DOS boot back in the gap. I think there's a lot of positivity in that sense. You're not going to have to pay this dude tens of millions of dollars to not coach a game. You pay maybe like a significant fraction of that number that you're already having to pay out these guys. It's not going to be coming from the university, so don't come at me with that mess. It's handled the right way. It's handled through private funding. I'm sure Gordon McKernan and Todd Graves, they'll handle that. They'll make sure he gets paid off and he's able to go about his business as usual. But I want to flip it over to LSU football because the big topic has been the transfer portal. We talked about it earlier in the week that I feel like Lane Kiffin has kind of fumbled the transfer portal, especially when it comes to trying to get a quarterback. And fast forward to Thursday night, right before Ole Miss and Miami are facing off in the college football playoff semis, we wind up hearing Damon Williams is deciding to go ahead and fulfill his contractual obligations and stick with the University of Washington after seemingly being set up and poised to transfer out and head over to LSU. And that's going to lead to a lot of other debates over the next several days and weeks is what's going on with LSU and the quarterback situation. It's going to be the billion-dollar question. Simply because, again, it's a lot like, I said it earlier in the week, it's a lot like trying to find a date for prom right now if you're LSU. The herd is starting to thin at this point, and you don't have too many options left. Is LSU going to go all in on Sam Leavitt, even though the Liz Frank injury is going to play a huge role to whether or not he's going to be ready to go week one? How much of that are you willing to risk with this young man? And there's a lot of other things that are going to be more or less at stake when it comes to this program. There's other guys out there, don't get me wrong, but I feel like their chips are all in on getting Sam Leavitt from Arizona State aboard. You could get Deuce Knight out of Auburn. I'm not necessarily sold on the kid, but I am going to be intrigued to see what happens if things don't go the right way for LSU in the quarterback position, at least on paper. Because we've talked about it a lot over the last few months, is that LSU Lane Kiffin somehow, some way has been able to turn chicken bleep into chicken salad, simply because of the fact that you just look at what he's doing right now, what he did with Ole Miss this past season. Trinidad Chambliss was virtually a no-name heading into the season. Lo and behold, this man had Trinidad Chambliss and helped lead this team to the college football playoff semifinals. That is nothing short of impressive and should be applauded. No matter if you root for Ole Miss or you root for LSU, like you look at that and be like, all right, this is why we want this guy to lead our team in 2026 and beyond, is he can turn any quarterback into a monster. And I think you could also say to a certain extent that's because of Charlie Weiss Jr. and his offensive game plan. But we are seeing something special out of this kid who was pretty much a JUCO quarterback, no name, no star, and somehow he's led this team like right on the door of the promised land of a national championship. Again, at the time of this taping, heading into the fourth quarter, Miami is up by 1. So anything can change. Again, we're taping this on Thursday and dropping it on a Monday. That's on a Friday. That's usually how we do things with the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. It's just going to be very interesting to see how things go in the transfer portal over the next couple of days. I'm sure we'll keep an eye on things heading into the weekend, and more importantly, when we get back on in business on Monday, we're going to talk about what's going on with the quarterback, and hopefully they do have their QB1 locked in for 2026. Makes life a lot easier. Trust me, as somebody who covered LSU and the Cajuns in the mid-2010s, whenever you had to deal with a lot of QB controversy and have to keep track of every single guy that you had in that locker room, brother, I'm willing to take a sure thing rather than not being sure who's going to be the guy. Because you know the old saying, if you have three quarterbacks, you got none. That's how I feel it's going to be for LSU if things don't go the right way over the course of the next week when it comes to the transfer portal window, because that thing, it is starting to close in fast. And I'll wrap things up here because I do want to talk about Cajuns men's hoops for a minute, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are nervous for a lot of different reasons with what's going on with men's basketball. Because they looked okay heading into conference play. They lost some games they should have won. Overall, their record's not that great. While we're taping this, the Cajuns are currently up by 7 with about 9 minutes left in the ball game, but they're standing at 3-13, year one of Quantas White. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are impatient, and I understand that from one perspective, but the other side of this is, if I'm a fan of athletics with the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, I need to just temper my expectations and be a little bit more patient. Simply because it's the first year of Quantas White. He's having to rebuild from square one, and he is trying his damnedest to get this team back up to what they were just a few short years ago. Don't forget, it wasn't that long ago. In fact, it was 2023 when Bob Marlin, by some miracle, wound up leading the Louisiana Raging Cajuns to the NCAA tournament. Like, that was a miracle team that we saw with Cajuns men's basketball just a few short years ago. I'm still blown away by that team and what they did back in the 2022-2023 season. That was supposed to be Bob Marlin's last year. I was hearing it from people midway through the season. Like, I can remember, like, right before winter break when they lost to Texas, even before that, I was hearing rumors circling for a minute that was going to be his last season. They were going to let him retire. Lo and behold, they put together an incredible rally, and they win the Sun Belt Conference tournament before they made that a absolute gauntlet. I'll never understand why the Sun Belt Conference tournament switched their format, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Bottom line, I am super, super intrigued by what this team is going to do going forward, but I think this season, you just got to take an L, you got to move on, and more importantly, try and compete more with recruiting, and also try and focus on getting guys out of that transfer portal that are going to make an immediate impact. That's at least how I see things. But appreciate you listening into the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. First week back after a little bit of a hiatus. But don't you worry, we ain't going anywhere anytime soon. So make sure you stay tuned. We'll be back Monday with another edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast.